One day, she's talking to a friend about the difference between a secret and a mystery in an artwork. Her friend says that with a secret, the artwork is over once you find it out. It's an outside joke. With a mystery, there's always a surplus to return to. That's what makes secrets disappointing or harmful, and can make mysteries enduring. Her mystery is a family photograph taken when she was 7 years old.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing this work in progress with us. So I'm going to briefly introduce the two of you, and then we're going to have a short discussion followed up by an open Q&A. But feel free to interrupt if there's an urgent question that you'd like to ask before. So Sarah Browne, to the left, is an artist concerned with bodily experiences of knowledge, labor, and justice. Her practice involves sculpture, film, performance, and public projects, and frequently takes place in the form of interdisciplinary collaboration. Sarah's recent projects include Echoes Bones, a collaborative filmmaking project with autistic young people, and Public Feeling, a public art commission in South Dublin leisure centres. She has had solo exhibitions in Stockholm, Brisbane, and Frankfurt, and has participated in the Bergen Assembly and the Liverpool Biennial. And Elaine Lillian Joseph in the middle is an audio describer based in London and Birmingham. She's a founding member of Soundscribe, a global majority collective of audio describers and consultants specializing in access for performance work, art institutions, and moving image. Elaine offers an embodied and creative approach that resists the pressure to create depersonalized audio descriptions, recentering marginalized voices through consultations with blind and visually impaired audiences. Recent projects include Eve Stainton's Impact Driver at the Institute for Contemporary Arts in London, an online screening of Hofesh Shechta's Political Mother, and a newly commissioned audio described track for Black audio film collectives, Handsworth Songs. So we have been sharing a little bit some ideas of what we'd like to discuss. And one main aspect that I would like to address is the question of labor and collaboration. And then, depending on the time, we still have also the question of visibility and invisibility. But before we start with these set of questions, you suggested as a framework for this discussion the notion of the inside and outside joke. So I would really like you to tell us a little bit more how you came up with this idea, how it relates to your understanding of access and to your collaboration for Buttercup. I was kind of, somehow also a little bit struck by the idea that a joke can also have something violent about it, can be a form of exclusion precisely for people who live non-normative lives or inhabit non-normative bodies. On the other hand, obviously, laughter and the joke has a long tradition of being a subversive act, potentially. I was thinking of Hélène Cixous, The Laughter of Medusa from 1975, but also I was reminded of a quote from the Carabing Film Collective, the indigenous media group, who were speaking about the idea that their practice is grounded in knowledge that is also addressing their community and not necessarily catering to an outsider's audience. So it's also a form of resisting being othered and exoticized, and of doing community work as a form also of indigenous justice. But either way, I don't know whether these ideas relate to what both of you are thinking in suggesting this framework.
Hi, everybody. I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm Sarah. I'm a white woman. I use she, her pronouns. I'm dressed in the black and white colours of the cows you have seen in the film. And I suggested this kind of inside joke idea. So that's a bit of an artifact from one of the projects that I worked on recently with this group of autistic young people, and humour became a very important way of how we dealt with each other, and kind of a way of, I guess we all know, like jokes they're a way of making an in-group and an out-group. So they were thinking about jokes as a way of, like a kind of neurodivergent humour, basically. And that's something that I think is really rich to consider in relation to disability. The film that we've just seen is informed by this film from the 70s by Hollis Frampton that is a very serious, amazing piece of work. And it's structured as a series of still photographs with a voiceover. And it struck me that the voiceover really operates like an audio description, except the central premise of the idea is that the audio description or the voiceover is out of sync with the image. So cognitively, you're trying to bridge this gap of what you might be seeing if you can see, and what you're listening to if you can listen. And that just made me think about, I guess, access in relation to who's called into a work or who's just automatically not kind of, don't want to say able, is just not kind of in the consideration.
All right. So thank you. My next question would be for you, Elaine. So going into this notion of labor and collaboration, I'd really like to start off by you telling us more about your job as an audio describer. If you can maybe also tell us a little bit about the history of audio description and how you came to it and what this work entails for you.
So my name is Elaine. I'm a black woman in my 30s, pronouns she, her. In terms of the history of audio description, it has a really long history. I can only really speak about the UK and the US, and that history of like pre-recorded audio description, I guess happening around like the 60s and the 70s. But when I think of audio description, I think of something so much longer, like, and much more informal. So if you're a blind person with a sighted partner maybe, or like sighted parents, often they would take that position as the audio describer. And I also know that the tradition is so much older in other parts of the world as well. In terms of how I got into AD, it was through captioning for hard of hearing. And I was explaining to Sarah yesterday, actually, that I got into it through commercial audio description, so just and captioning. So thinking of labour and how that whole process really kind of alienates the end user. They're not really part of that process. There are all of these specifications created by people not from that community. So basically sighted people or hearing people, setting standards and setting like crazy deadlines as well. So I was really happy to transition to moving image and spaces that allow that conversation, just talking about inside and outside joke, actually, just allowing the people who this service or practice is for to be part of how it's formed. So that's really kind of galvanized the way that I approach audio description. I think you asked another question, so I'm very bad at three.
Yeah, my question is really practical also for us to imagine how you work.
So then the way that I work is highly collaborative. So really, part of SoundScribe's ethos is always to come in at the beginning of a project, which is not that usual for traditional audio description. So just to explain, audio description is a service for blind and visually impaired people, and it's usually at the end of a project. So you might be looking for gaps, basically, to fit in some kind of interpretation of the visual elements of whatever it is. It could be film, it could be a sculpture in a museum or a TV program. So what's really exciting about the way that we work is not having to work around gaps and having something as flexible as a kind of work in progress. Like for Sarah's project, it means that not only do I not have to think of gaps, we can think of, we can match the audio description to the editing. We can give space where space is needed for the soundtrack, because the sound design on this is so important. We can also think of AD sitting outside of a work, so we can think of like an audio introduction sometimes, if that is necessary for the project, where you kind of summarize what's about to occur, like all of the main visual elements. And I think one of the pieces in this show has I think it's a pre-show audio description. So it's just a way of working flexibly with a piece of art.
So you were mentioning before captioning. I do wonder, because that was also a discussion we were having, the relationship between captions and audio description. Sarah, you were saying you find, so for instance, for Echoes Bones, the previous project where also you collaborated together, you were describing that you are showing one version with the captions, followed by one version with the audio description. And I do wonder why you feel that they might be mutually exclusive, or whether you can also imagine having both.
There will have to be different captions if it was the audio described version as well. So it would have to incorporate Elaine or another audio describer. I guess I only have so much sensory processing available when I'm editing something, so I couldn't conceive of being able to read and listen to the characters and the soundtrack, so I personally couldn't do that. And I'm not, I suppose, a part of the community that would need that. Elaine, I had asked you about, is that something people would use?
One of the projects that you mentioned in the introduction, Hands with Songs, then we kind of grappled with that because, obviously there are also blind and deaf people who might want to interact with both. I think that just personally, like a kind of toggling, so being able to choose, which version you want to access. So maybe you might want to access the audio description, so maybe there are captions that include that information, but kind of like I've found that feedback from people from the community has said that can be a bit of a sensory overload, and that in general, if you don't need both, then people just basically like the option to choose between either captions or audio description, because it can just become a lot of text to read, actually, and quite difficult to differentiate between what is the original dialogue and then what's the audio description. But I guess, like, for anything, it's always, having the option, basically, like, being asked which one would you prefer.
Right. So let us talk a little bit about the different modes of collaboration that inform both projects that you have been working on together. So on the one hand, your collaboration, how it maybe also changes the usual scripts of your professions, how you also maybe learn from each other, but maybe also where some certain limits are also. And also in a more expansive way, the collaborations that you do on a more collective level. So collaborating with autistic young people for Echo's Bones, and also collaborating with users, blind and visually impaired users for Buttercup. If you could describe these processes of multi-layered collaborations that maybe also tend to become somehow messy, perhaps.
So just thinking about Echo's Bones, I thought there was a really interesting moment of, I should explain this. Whenever I work on a project with real people, I basically send out this kind of form where they can self-describe. So they can say things like hair, ethnicity, build, etc. So that I'm never making assumptions about how I'm describing somebody. And I thought we had like an interesting moment where one of the participants felt that they didn't want their ethnicity to be declared. And yeah, I guess it's just like for me, so thinking of like traditional audio description, there's a sense of like objectivity, and that the audio describer is supposed to be this objective voice that doesn't get in the way. And there's a like default of, for example, never describing race. I know that's really big in the US. That, I'm sure there are lots of exceptions, but the mainstream is to not describe race. So for me, it was like an interesting moment of not tension, but like, what is the word? Yeah, just like learning how to navigate that space of a young person who doesn't want to do that, but also feeling like as an audio describer, then it's important to foreground the fact that there was one person basically, and who weren't white. So yeah, I just thought in terms of the collaboration, that was like an interesting moment, and it just meant like finding another way of describing them, like in a way that, how to explain it, in a way that is authentic to them basically, but also still allows a blind person to understand the makeup of the people who are part of that project. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, it was just like it was just a moment that I hadn't encountered before basically. And then on this project for Buttercup, we had a really fun forum with, was it 5 people? Yeah, who are blind and visually impaired, like a spectrum of sight loss or like low vision. And that's just always super fun as an audio describer to get feedback, and also just a really great reminder that there's no kind of one size fits all for access, and that what was really great for some people on that call was maybe sometimes too much for other people on that call, in terms of like the audio or like the level of immersiveness as well, like people reacting to the sound design was just, really, really cool to hear, because we were trying to do something a bit different with this audio description and have this difference between the mics, so having a kind of close mic for the like intimate audio described bits, and then a further distance for the narrator. So just really fun it's always just really fun to get feedback from the people who are actually going to be listening to it.
And like we were also working with an amazing composer, David Donoghue. So, and our collaboration was remote. Like Elaine and I haven't met before coming to Zurich. So that's unusual that it took this to make it happen. But David and I spent a good bit of time on the farm as I was figuring out what this thing might be, or like what was I trying to look at, or what was I trying to get at. And David took a lot of field recordings as well as making music. So you had this other question about collaboration and the kind of non-human collaborators in the film, or the non-living collaborators in the film. And a lot of that comes from, I suppose, for me, the materials of the film and the shared time and space of being in a field with David with a lot of cows and calves, and being affected by that in some way. And trusting somebody else to like translate that, because not everybody would kind of share that space or be sensitive to those experiences. It actually reminded me that in the captions of Echo's Bones, when we were working on that in the subtitles, David is an avid bird watcher. So some of David's expertise was also consulting on those captions, and then the captions become something like very specific that show you this kind of extra information about, this is a teal and it sounds like laugh. Like, it's a totally nerdy level of detail, but what that can do is, I suppose, show that it's not, I think access tools are so interesting when they're really foregrounded as like creative, subjective, situated knowledges that Elaine has. Like, Elaine writes these incredibly precise pieces of prose for all of this audio description work, as well as being a voice artist. So with this work, I was kind of trying to borrow or like copy lots of Elaine's methods of audio description there's a kind of a amazing rigor and clarity that comes with trying to describe something but not explain it. Like, as an artist, that's a very interesting space to be in, where you're basically getting to work really closely with a translator and trying to find exactly the right word, or no, that's too much, or that's not enough, or what are you trying to get up there? That doesn't make any sense also.
Right, but that's precisely what I so love about those audio descriptions, and also the captionings in Echo's Bones. This other kind of information that I wouldn't otherwise be able to access were it not for those descriptions or captions, and the use of the extremely precise use of words. I think my favorite caption in Echo's Bones is when, so there's this person playing basketball, and there's one line, there's the ball falling, and then the caption goes, a disappointing thud. And it's so beautiful because it encapsulates the fact that when the ball has not, has not scored, and thinking about how the emotion, the potential emotions of a sound, how you could talk about those. And so maybe coming back to what you were saying previously, so you were talking about this idea of being subjective or objective, that is informing, I don't know, somehow maybe the kind of the rules of your profession, but on the other hand, precisely there is also here kind of a normative understanding. I mean, this idea that you wouldn't describe race seems kind of occluding precisely an experience that sighted users would have. So I don't know if you could maybe add a little how you engage with this tension between this presupposed normative objectivity and more creative forms of subjectivity.
I think another way that we tried to do on this project is, like thinking about how, like the use of the voice basically. So again, thinking of like the default audio describer voice. It's supposed to kind of not draw attention to itself, basically. So I think the fact that we've created this kind of like dreamier, like I said, like close mic voice already tells you that something else is kind of going on. But in terms of subjectivity, I think maybe more on Echo's bones potentially. Sorry, I'm still finishing a thought.
Maybe it's something to do with like place or hands where it's on their accent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so like actually thinking of Hands with Songs again, kind of inserting a more I guess like Brummy version of myself, which is something I was talking to. So Brummy is someone who's from Birmingham, which is where I'm originally from, in England. So it's kind of like maybe like accessing different parts of myself rather than always having this one kind of linear audio describer voice. Which can be more, more playful, more kind of personal, and like when we were talking about how to approach the audio description on this, I think what's so fun as an audio describer is always learning. So I do not come from an agricultural or farming background. I'm sure that a lot of the words that you said that you weren't that weren't common to you were also not actually that common to me. So it's really fun, like you said, about kind of being specific, but also being a kind of like a mediator, actually, a kind of translator in that sense. That you can be too specific sometimes in audio description. So finding a way of like like kind of embedding myself, but also making sure that it's still helpful, as a kind of guide for a blind or visually impaired person.
So I think we're gonna slowly open up the discussion for questions from the audience, and maybe was, or is there already one? Perfect.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing this work in progress with us. It can be, I think, probably a nerve-wracking or maybe sort of brave thing, so thank you. I wanted to ask a question about tension, which I think is for Sarah, but this is not to the exclusion of you by any stretch of the imagination. Because I noticed this, and I don't know if this was like a tongue-in-cheek thing or if it was more serious, but I think it's sort of tongue-in-cheek. I think at the beginning of the film you described Temple Grandin as a disability or an autism activist, and then later when you bring her up again you say like slaughterhouse consultant Temple Grandin, and so there's this like this tension, right? This sort of real tension in that name. But also I don't tend to identify as someone who has ocular sensitivity by any stretch of the imagination, but I was unable to watch the film with the flashing lights, and so I spent a lot of the film not only with my eyes closed, but actually with my hand over my eyes. And so I wanted to ask about this intentionality in these sort of toward the auditory, while what seems like a hyper-intentionality of saturation of the ocular or visual, right, to the point that it's almost pushing the boundaries of what is physically watchable by the human eye and brain.
And I should say that I also did not watch it because, not for ocular reasons, just like
Emotional reasons.
it's just like too much somehow. It's not super deliberate, actually. Like some of the attention to the sound is also about, and audio description was also about trying to remove lots of choice or have like very specific constraints. So that sequence with the flashing, like it is just the plants that have made that pattern. And it's only since we've started showing it to other people at a bigger size than a small size that it's become a bit of a, oh, there really is flashing lights, we need to say that to people. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer it. Like, I still don't really know what I've done in a way, or what it is. So, I think for me, there was really something about, in the whole thing that is also like, in the way of describing something or trying to be like as literal as possible. That somehow things get more and more mysterious the more you try to just say it's plants on a film, and you know the language seems to separate from the image in a way, and the way that, like, for me, I do feel like a cow kind of approaching something very difficult with this whole set of relationships in the photograph. And then, like backing away, or just my kind of relationship to the film feels quite like that. That I can like approach a little bit and then like, I just want to listen to it or something. It's a bit of a non-answer for you. But it was important for me to describe Temple Grandin twice. Like, she's not a unproblematic person without a lot of tension. That's another thing.
I keep getting static shocks, just so you know. Thank you for sharing the work in progress. It's a big thing to do, especially in a conference, in a museum. I really enjoyed watching the film, and there were some scenes that were quite upsetting, and I found it quite interesting how the audio describer or the narrator sort of gave me as a viewer moments of respite and like release from those tense moments, and which I was also very grateful of. Was that a deliberate intention, or is it? There were like specific moments where I was like, okay, now we can take a step back from this intense scene. What's happening to Buttercup? Then it sort of came back into the attention again, and there was also moments when the narration changed. It became the prose, the narration, and then I also enjoyed those moments which were very much about audio description, and it really helped sort of focus my attention on specific scenes.
I feel with a lot of that kind of sense of sustained tension and release, I think a lot of that is to do with David's work on the music, actually. And Elaine and I had some discussions about direction in terms of how much emotion should be in the voice, or I really did not want this to be a sentimental thing at all. And I think a lot of the emotion that's felt, it to me is quite felt in the body, and it really comes from the sound. And it's not, for me, it's not trying to explain that to somebody, it's more creating. That was not part of my presentation. I can't top that, yeah, but I think it's this guy that demonstrates the physical sensations that go beyond language.
I was also going to talk about the soundtrack because it came out in our forum with our users, and they said that there was one guy who said about 2 scenes where it's the lists, and then there are really strong sounds kind of. I really remember the second time, so it was right at the end where there's that long list, and I say something like a padlock, a broken lock on a gate, and there are these sounds that are like kind of attached to it, and that person was saying, I feel like there's a lack of audio description, I don't know what's going on, but actually it is still the plant matter that's going, but I feel like because the soundtrack is creating this this tension, it's really interesting that like orally he was like, oh, but maybe something visually might also be happening here. So yeah, it really resonates that, like watching it for the first time really huge, you do really feel it in the body. It's also interesting having a session like this where I'm assuming that most people are sighted, but you're experiencing audio description, and audio description does kind of, like you said, like make those choices for you. It focuses what you're looking at, or what you're, and also what you're listening to as well, because it's obviously a lot of narration in this. So it just kind of, it makes me happy in the sense that I feel like captions are more readily accessible and accepted, basically, in the world, in a way that audio description kind of isn't. And I just hope that more people will come to audio description, because I feel like you gain so much more, basically. There's so much more like additional information in there that can be really fun.